Hello and welcome back to Getting Open with me, Andrea Miller. Today's show's a little different. Today's show is on divorce. I've never done a show on divorce, but this one, my guest has written a beautiful book, which I will talk about a lot, called Own Your Own Divorce. And honestly, it is such a radical departure from how we typically think of divorce. This is a lawyer who positions himself as a peacemaker and has so many tips and hacks for how to choose the right lawyer, for how to save money, for how to avoid so much hurt and heartache. Honestly, it is such a refreshing and beautiful book. And this show really delivers on helping people take those early initial steps if you're thinking about divorce and going through really the key things you need to know as you go through a divorce. So with no further ado, let's get into it. For 50 years, today's guest, Laurence Wilson, has been a practicing divorce lawyer, mediator, collaborative attorney, private judge, and volunteer Superior Court judicial officer in the San Francisco Bay Area. During this time, Larry has helped more than 4,000 divorcing couples. He advocates peacemaking by encouraging separating couples to display kindness, decency, integrity, generosity, and gratitude to one another. Sounds radical as a divorce lawyer, doesn't it? That's why I'm so excited to have him on Getting Open. And in full disclosure, Larry and I have been friends for over 20 years. His new book called Own Your Own Divorce was published just recently in July of 2025. And I must add, it is compelling. It is thorough. It is extremely unique. And hey, literary buffs out there, it can't be extremely unique. I assure you, this one is extremely unique. Larry, thank you for publishing such a beautiful, comprehensive, heartfelt, and even humorous book on divorce. I appreciate your liberal use of the word dicks. And guys, I promise this is not what you think. So get your minds out of the gutter. We're going to come back and talk about what this is. But in all seriousness, in this book, you guys, you will learn how to determine if your marriage is irretrievably over, how to reduce conflict, protect your finances, and preserve your dignity, your dignity, your peace, and your family. We're going to try to cover as much of this as possible in today's show. Welcome, Larry, to Getting Open.
Hi, Andrea. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise.
This book is something that my wife told me when I started writing it about 3 years ago. I'd been talking about writing it for my entire career. And I didn't have as much to say at the beginning of the career, but as I got close to all the years that I've got now, I'm glad I waited. And what the real purpose of this is, it's intended to be a guidebook for people who don't have a guidebook. And you like to hike, don't you?
Oh, yeah. As a Colorado gal, I hike all the time.
Yeah. Have you ever found yourself out in the middle of the woods and you see all these sort of trail signs, trail number 143, 247, a couple of the geographical locales, but you don't have the map and you don't really have a clue which is the closest, where you're really going. You're not lost, but you also don't know where you are. This is the way most people feel when they're facing unhappiness in their marital relationship or their partnership if it's a non-marital relationship. And they're not really lost, but they don't really know whether they're coming, whether they're going, whether they should act tough, whether they should be kind, whether they should go to a hard-ass lawyer, whether they should go to a therapist, whether they should go to a priest. They don't know what they need to do. And so I've looked over the years at the literature, and I've worked with lots of therapists who are constantly handing out books and guides and working with people nobody really seemed to have much of anything that had been prepared to help people on the personal journey from beginning to end, those early feelings of dissatisfaction or unhappiness. There wasn't a single book in the divorce literature that really answered these questions. And in my experience in working with couples, I early on chose being a peacemaker rather than a warrior. And the market for peacemakers kind of selectively found its way to me because I got the reputation. Larry's a good person to go to if you want to get out of a relationship with less pain, lower expense, so forth and so on. And so more of those people beat their way to my door. A lot of people came to my door who wanted to have warriors, and sometimes you need a warrior. I wasn't the right person. I got pretty good at saying no to those cases. Sometimes there were peacemaker cases where I also wasn't the right person. I tried to pay attention, and what I learned was some people are more matched to working with other people than others. There's a great deal of anger. There's a great deal of trauma in human relationships. People need to be well matched to the people who are guiding them to the next chapter in their lives. And sometimes the next chapter in their lives is fixing a marriage and reconciling. And I can't
Does that happen very much? I mean, of the 4,000 plus couple, well, you've helped over 4,000 couples. How many of them have actually said, "Oh my God, Larry, you saved us"?
I started keeping score about 30 years ago. And so this is an estimate. Well, that's like being a cancer doctor and getting spontaneous remissions. Those actually, I say hurrah for those. I really celebrate reconciliations. And it's about 40 out of the 4,000. That doesn't sound like much. Yeah, it's a little bit less than one per year, but it's 1%. Many, many more people who started acting more kindly to one another, or they got therapy, or they started paying closer and better attention to one another, extended their relationships, or they came to me for the consultation and disappeared, and I don't know whether they durably reconciled or not, but many of those probably also reconciled. And so one of the reasons I put a couple of chapters in this book in trying to determine whether you're actually in a relationship, just drifting apart, can you drift back together again, or are you going to hit a relationship expiration date? Why that's so important is so many people who are at the edge of ending a relationship haven't actually reached the end. And so I wanted people to have that as just one of the things that's in the guidebook in terms of working out, is this a relationship that I've invested my love, my time, my money, my energy, my life into? I don't want people bailing from those relationships either too early or too often.
Yeah. Well, or too late, right? I mean, how many people, you talk about that in the book, about people who, I think you call them zombie marriages, right? And there's a huge price to be paid for that too. You talk about how, I mean, honestly, probably the line that you repeat, at least from my reading the most, is be your best self. Right. And I feel like you don't really typically hear that, especially from divorce lawyers, and how, I mean, it feels like a central thesis or a central objective for you is helping people navigate the legal maze of separation and divorce with cooperation, compassion, kindness, and clarity. And that's, I mean, again, to your point, there's next to nothing out there that offers those as driving objectives. And that's probably the biggest thing that makes your book feel so refreshing. And to the extent that there are people that want that. They don't want to be, it's already hard enough for most couples going through divorce to make it worse by, well, let's actually pivot into the divorce industrial complex, DIC. What do you mean? How can people reclaim their divorce from the divorce industrial complex, the DICs?
I will answer that, but I'm going to give you just a quick answer to that spot that you just left. In the modern theory of disease for most clinicians is that inflammation is one of the things that's most responsible for heart disease, for precancer, all sorts of maladies. In human relationships, the functional equivalent of inflammation is friction between people. The way to lower friction is by showing kindness, decency, gratitude, generosity. Whenever you reduce friction in a human relationship, whether it's the beginning of a relationship, the middle of a relationship, or at the end of a relationship, it's like removing inflammation in your own body. And when you do that, life is better. That's the central theme of the non-legal portion of the book.
Well, let me just add to that, Joe. Let me just add to that, because not only is it great for your relationship, but Joe Dispenza and probably others have data on the impact. I mean, if we're talking inflammation on your body and the negative impact, the truth is gratitude and kindness cause your heart to beat more. I want to say more efficiently, more. What's the word? With greater coherence. So when you're talking about reducing the friction in relationships and using the equivalent to our physical bodies, the truth is kindness, gratitude, compassion, cooperation, those give us a physiological boost. And I just want to also add, Larry, I mean, this is one of my favorite topics. So often we're waiting for the other person to be kind first, right? So often we're waiting for the other person to show gratitude and to reduce friction. And your book, you really make a very cogent case. Even this line that I already read, I'm going to read it again. This idea of being your best self, even when it's hard. I mean, to me, that as a driving objective for people to really take to heart is one of the great gifts of this book. Right. I mean, I feel like you can reclaim your agency if you really take that to heart and totally transform the complexion of the experience. Right. Then it's not all happening to you. I mean, I'm a big believer. We all have far more agency and power than we typically give ourselves credit for. So if we're showing up as our best self, I mean, it's almost like, what is it? Schrodinger's cat. Okay. Now I'm like going off on a tangent, like how people show up impacts how it impacts the outcome, right? The observer impacts the outcome in physics.
If you care for your partner, if you love your partner, and most of the relationships, not all marriages, start with love. That's another section of the book. But love is an essential ingredient in most Western marriages. If you really care for your partner, or even if you only once cared for your partner, and they are not expressing the gratitude or the kindness first, I encourage people to express the kindness and gratitude first as an act of love itself, as an act of leadership. Sometimes your partner doesn't have the bandwidth or the strength to lead, even though they want to. So if you really want to get the ball rolling, stop keeping score. Just do it. It's the right thing to do. You know it's the right thing to do. And I think keeping score is a malaise in a lot of Western society. If I'm 99% wrong in something and my spouse is 1% wrong in something, or vice versa, I can still be the person who leads with the forgiveness or leads with the dialogue to try to improve things, even if I'm the person who was less at fault. Why? because our relationship will be better as soon as it gets fixed, which means we'll be doing better with our kids, with our communities, with the world.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's a very selfish and the most rational thing you can do, right? And yet so often when we're hurt and angry and feel betrayed or feel slighted, our instinct is to hit back, is to punish, right? I think we've all been there. So it's a reminder that at literally any second, you have that choice. So Larry, you talk a lot about the DICs. These are people from the divorce industrial complex. What is that?
Well, let's go to the DICS first, the DICs. I was told when I wrote a book that I had to start with a good hook. And so I started with the line, the DICs are coming. They're coming for you. They're coming for your marriage. They're coming for your wallet. And then I define who they are. They are the disruptors, the inciters, and the conflict creators from the divorce industrial complex. Most lawyers are not DICs. There are a lot of good lawyers out there, but not everybody can find the good lawyers, and not everybody can separate the good from the bad. It would take too much time on this podcast to talk about the tsunami of change that's about to come to the legal profession. But particularly with artificial intelligence coming in, the work of divorce is going to take far less time than it's taken in the past. Prices should be coming down. The volume of cases is coming down because fewer people are getting divorced. And the individual people looking for good divorce lawyers, people who will resonate with their needs, who will be appropriate for their case, it's really hard for people to find them. Some people have cases that require litigation. Those are sad cases. They're cases where there's toxicity, there may be violence, there may be theft. There are all sorts of horrible things that happen in certain divorces. You have to find a high-quality litigator for that. There are some cases that need to go to people who are kind and who are gentle and will help repair. Some of those cases can be reconciled. People need to be able to find those types of lawyers. But part of the problem with the divorce industrial complex is there are far too many people trying to serve far too few cases. And oddly enough, the number of cases is declining. There's because
you're saying because divorce is declined, like divorce peaked, a handful of years ago at nearly 50%? And what is it now?
Well, people say it's 50%, and on a combined basis, approximately 50% of all people who marry will divorce. But in first marriages, the percentage is 40%. Later marriages, it's higher. But within first marriages, the people who get divorced, half of the people get divorced in the first 5 years. And so if you have made it to the 5-year mark in a first marriage, the odds are almost 80% you're going to make it till death. And so, yeah, it's very hardening. Moreover, when I started practice in 1975, no-fault divorce had just started in California. There were hundreds of thousands of zombie marriages that were slowly, it's like a glacier at the end of the ice age.
Define what that is. I think a lot of people will be shocked because some people will know, be like, yeah, we know what that is. But I think for those who don't, it's shocking. And you write a lot about this because I think it still persists in New York.
Well,
right?
The zombie marriage, no, the New York rules have changed, and people can get divorce anywhere in the United States of America now without having to show fault. But in New York, that had a horrible system for decades. And you could only get a divorce if you could show mental cruelty, abandonment, theft, adultery. And so a phony divorce industry there was a famous story in the New York Mirror, I believe it was, where a woman was interviewed by the newspaper, and she said, I was the blonde person who was having the affair with the respondent in 100 divorce cases. And a phony industry was created so people could have a faux adultery in order for them to get out of their unhappy relationships. And it was more convenient for people who were miserable living with one another to stage really something that was morally humiliating and went totally against the social fabric in that era in order to get a divorce. And so in California, there were hundreds of thousands of people who at the end of fault divorce suddenly could get divorced, and they didn't have to show cause. And they wouldn't be penalized for merely having gotten to the end of a relationship that wasn't making either of the parties happy. And so what happened was, for the first 20 years of my career, there was a huge volume of divorces and a huge volume of cases.
There's a big backlog, it sounds like, huh?
Yeah, and that glacier melted. And when the glacier finally melted, which was close to the year 2000, the number of divorce lawyers who had entered into the profession had proliferated like crazy because there was a need, there was a demand.
Right, supply and demand.
And so the supply went down of new cases. The number of servers who were out there to help had increased. Many very positive forms of divorce servicing, including collaborative law, which has the utilization of not only attorneys, but mental health professionals as coaches, child specialists to help with children, financial specialists to help with finances, allied professionals who are cheaper than lawyers, helping people get better services for less expense. All of a sudden, thousands of professionals had entered the field with the very, very salutary intent of helping people who were in pain and in trouble, just as this river of cases was starting to decline. And so what happened in the smoking industry, Andrea, when people stopped smoking? They increased their prices as the volumes of sales went down. And that's what's happened within the divorce industrial complex. In San Francisco, the elite lawyers now charge, and I'm glad you're sitting down, more than $1,000 per hour for work. And most of them won't have a lot of trouble selling those hours, at least not right now. But middle-class people who are trying to get help find that they're facing prices of $500 or $600 an hour, and school teachers can't afford this. A person who's a housemaid can't even afford a book to get going. So we've got a real serious problem in terms of the delivery of services to people who have need, and the divorce industry hasn't done a good job, and they're going to be getting theirs fairly soon with AI coming out.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so how does AI change that?
Well, AI changes it. Right now, the average middle-class divorce case probably requires 20 to 40 hours of professional work, traditionally all done by lawyers. Some of this will be done by allied professionals, coaches, financial people. And so the amount of work for the lawyers has been declining, although the lawyers do try to keep their fingers in it for financial survival. AI is going to reduce the number of hours by at least half. Some people estimate by as much as 90%. So instead of needing maybe 40 hours, you may be able to get all of the grunt work done in 5 hours. And so the face-to-face FaceTime between a lawyer and a client in order to negotiate a settlement is going to be compressed. The amount of time that's still required with mental health professionals, communications coaches, people to teach people or instruct people how to get along better with their kids, or to do better co-parenting when they're splitting, that may go up. But there's going to be less work for the lawyers, I believe.
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, I feel like there's so much fear and potential around AI, and we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But I want to make sure we're covering the highlights of your book principally here instead. But this idea that there can be just a massive efficiency and cost savings for people who can't afford those rates. I think in the book you mentioned most places the rates are between $200 and $500 per hour. I mean, the Bay Area, of course, is also an area of concentration of wealth. So probably New York, LA, San Francisco, those areas are going to command a premium. But even at $200-$300 an hour, if you're talking 20 to 40 hours, that's a lot, right? Along with the heartache and the suffering and so forth. All right, so let's pivot into the processes that are available. I learned a lot from you in this book. Will you talk about that?
There are 4 processes to get a divorce. The first one is do-it-yourself, DIY. The second is mediation. Third is collaboration. The fourth is litigation. The easiest and the cheapest is do-it-yourself. Most upper middle class, professional class, and wealthy people don't do this because they can afford somebody to help them. Poor people and middle class people in areas where lawyers cost too much sometimes have to do DIY. And do-it-yourself is very difficult. It's very challenging because the court system hasn't made it easy to get your own divorce. There are lots of papers. The court is opaque. It's not transparent. So I put a couple of chapters in there trying to make the system transparent for people who can only afford to do this system. I hope most people are able to get at least free help, and most communities do have divorce facilitators and volunteer groups where people can get assistance. But if you've got a rough case, you may have to do it on your own. It's painful for people to do DIY on their own because they are in emotional turmoil. And if on top of everything else, they have limited financial resources, they're in turmoil, and they have to learn a complex and opaque system where they get criticized by the judges when they do things wrong. It just creates an overwhelming situation. I have so much compassion for people to go through this.
Okay, so DIY can be fraught with a lot of pitfalls. It can be the least expensive, but that can be deceptive, and it can vary from state to state in terms of how complicated it is. So it feels like a lot of the caveat emptor, buyer beware. Talk to me about mediation. I think this is one a lot of people don't know about.
Well, I'm a fan of mediation, but mediation has positives for many people and it has negatives for others. And one of the things I talk about in choosing lawyers and choosing a method for getting a divorce is the lawyers who are providing services to clients have built-in biases. As a trained mediator, I have a bias towards mediation. I also have a bias towards collaboration, which we'll talk about later, because I'm trained in that. Does that make either mediation or collaboration the best fit for the client who just walked into your office? Possibly not. If the only thing you do is mediation, you're going to try to sell the flavor that the one flavor that you have in your office. And so one of the dangers that consumers have when they're interviewing lawyers is they need to know what the biases of their providers are. And so you can get past the bias of the mediator's bias for mediation. The advantages of mediation are two people meet, and it doesn't even have to be with a lawyer. Some mediators are therapists, but they meet with a person. That person meets with them in confidence. In every state in the United States, and in some but not all countries overseas, mediation is protected by statute as being confidential. And so what happens in mediation stays in mediation. If somebody says, I'll agree to do X, Y, and Z for you, and they change their mind later, that will never come out of mediation to bite them. And so
well,
mediation...
let me just interject here. You make a really good point. And I wanted to ask you about arbitration as well. I mean, if there's been an affair, or if there's been something that people don't want disclosed, if they're going through the court, the court system does it vary from state to state, or is all of that subject to public disclosure? And then you get into finances and a whole bunch of, I feel like, especially these uglier divorces, it can be, what you don't want revealed can be revealed.
Well,
if there isn't the protection of confidentiality.
In the state of California, there's been an ongoing dialogue about privacy for decades. And the public, and including the newspapers, following celebrities in particular, would like to know everything. Individuals look at this as their private business, and they want the public to know nothing. One good thing about mediation is mediation allows you an unparalleled level of confidentiality. And so a lot of people with high net worth or who are celebrities like to go into mediation because they can guarantee higher levels of confidentiality. When you're in a public court system, though, unless the interests of the children mandate, most hearings are open. The public, the press can come. A lot of the filings are seen. And so, getting confidentiality is important for a lot of people. Mediation helps. But in mediation, a couple meets with one person, the mediator, and that's cheaper because there's only one meter running.
Mm-hmm. And they don't necessarily have to have a law degree. So it could be substantially cheaper, not just because there's only one person, but they may not be charging the fee that a lawyer would charge.
True,
is that accurate?
But when you mediate your case, you're also free to follow rules and requirements other than those that are done in state law. So you don't have to slavishly follow the prenup that you didn't know you had, which is the family code of the state in which you reside, or the family code in the country in which you reside. And so you can deviate from that. One of the things I like about mediation is couples come in, and when they hear what's in the California law books, just to use my state for an example, they say, "Oh my God, that's terrible. We don't want that." Or sometimes they do want that. If they can customize and make basically a purpose-built settlement for themselves in accordance with their own terms, they get to design, talk about agency. A couple who are able to talk constructively with one another can design their own ending. And they can say, we don't want to do exactly what this part of the law requires. They are free to the extent of about 99% of all issues to do that. There are a couple. But
let me ask you this. In Colorado, it's like an equitable state or something like that. I mean, the idea is that it's really meant to be fair. Unlike, what I've heard about Florida, what I've heard about, I think you have some really crazy facts about Texas being honestly we already know. I have family in Texas and a lot of good friends, but dang, it is like anti-female to the extreme. I didn't realize how extreme it was in the case of alimony. And don't even get me started. But so obviously these things vary from state to state. But in the case of Colorado, are you saying for somebody getting divorced in Colorado, if they decide to go the way of mediation, that whereas the law for divorce is a more equitable distribution of property and the person making more money, would get, formerly known as alimony. I guess that's probably still being used, but I feel like there's a different, fancier way of explaining it now. Are you saying that those laws are typically able to be circumvented by mediation?
They're not able to be circumvented. What happens that's different is the participants can shape those to create a customized resolution for their own family that works better for them than what would work in court. So, for example, California is a community property state, which means if one of the questions I used to ask people, would you rather marry a Rockefeller or a rock star? Do you get the same result? Well, if you marry a Rockefeller, the Rockefeller has a lot of pre-existing separate property, which under California is not marital property. It doesn't get divided. And you could live in comfort and luxury and not have one dime of mutually created marital property. Whereas if you married Mick Jagger and were married to him for 1 week and he had 1 million per night concerts, there would be $10 million of community property earned, quote, jointly since the date of your marriage, and you'd each get $5 million from that 10-day marriage. And so it depends. It all depends. But in a mediation, you could be married to the Rockefeller, and if the Rockefeller had had kind and loving feelings towards you at the beginning and realized, this is a terribly, terribly unjust and unfair disposition in this particular jurisdiction where we're living. And, I don't want to do that. I'm a decent person. I care for you deeply when we got married. You are I'm making this a female Rockefeller. You're the father of our children. And you know what? I am going to customize something that is going to allow our family in our post-marital situation to be as good as we can afford to make it. And then you go ahead and do it. And that's part of the being your best self always that my book tries to take people to always, regardless of whether the legal system favors them economically or not.
Okay.
Well, the primary disadvantage of mediation is a mediator doesn't have any power to force compliance if somebody isn't fully coming up with all information.
Okay, right. Yeah, they can't force any kind of discovery or anything like that.
Right. Nor can they force compliance if somebody's misbehaving. And so if you're trying to mediate with somebody who does cut corners once in a while and might not try to show you the entire, every card in the deck of cards, who might try to keep, she didn't learn about the motorcycle, and so we don't have to divide about the motorcycle. Mediation may not be the right path for you. And because you're doing much, much more on trust. But let's go quickly to the other systems. There's a system of getting divorced that's called collaborative law, which is the new kid on the block. It only started in the year 1990, approximately. And a lawyer up in Minnesota, who was a very, very successful divorce lawyer, concluded that the entire divorce industry was broken. He said, this system just doesn't work. And he wanted to create a system where two lawyers would meet together with two clients, and the lawyers would do nothing but try to settle the case quickly and economically and on best possible terms for the clients. And he
Can I just chime in here? As a proud Minnesotan, I was so happy to hear Stu Webb just said, I'm tired of all this adversarial nonsense. And honestly, Larry, I think of so much of this as self-fulfilling, right? We're so used to seeing these ugly divorces portrayed on TV and in the movies. And let's face it, our brains get imprinted by what we are seeing and hearing around us, right? And so huge props. And you talk about you personally being a change maker, and I know that about you, a peacemaker, excuse me. versus the warrior mentality. And I mean, let's just face it, interests are not aligned when it comes to, and yes, you rightfully say there are a lot of great divorce lawyers. God bless you people. And then there are some that are just, their own selfish interest is to make as much money as they can, to win cases, to enrich themselves. So I do want to give a shout out to this collaborative approach that was pioneered, 35 years ago, and again, you're going to talk about the pros and cons, but really getting back to this idea of looking to achieve an outcome that genuinely serves the interests of the parties, because I feel like that is not how most divorce lawyers are characterized, and how typically divorce is not portrayed as this process that can actually lead. I mean, if there's one good thing many good things about your book, this idea that it can actually lead you personally to a profound transformation. And you talk, yes, of course, there's heartbreak and so forth, most commonly for most people, but that it really can be a cause for celebration by taking the high road and achieving a personal transformation, which is not what you typically think. Okay, I'm going to quit talking and let you talk about collaborative divorce.
Collaborative divorce, as envisioned by Stu Webb when he started it, was going to turn the 40-hour divorce cases into 10-hour or 5-hour divorce cases. And it tended to work for a while. And I think one of the brilliant things that he put into collaborative divorce was 2 lawyers were going to meet with 2 clients rather than just one mediator meeting with the clients. And one of the deficiencies of mediation, to Stu Webb, was the mediator doesn't represent either of the couple who are meeting with the mediator. They don't have a lawyer. The mediator is just a facilitator, helping them communicate, helping them make a deal. And so if I'm your mediator, I don't say, oh, this is a good deal for you, or you could do better, or you shouldn't go this way. I say, go talk with your own advisor, your independent advisor. And so Stu wanted an independent advisor at each person's side when they were going through, which is good. He wanted the lawyers to do only settlement. And so his brilliant idea was the lawyers and the clients are all going to sign an agreement at the beginning. It's called the participation agreement. And in the participation agreement, the lawyers both agree that if either one of them takes the case to court or either one of the parties goes to court, both lawyers get fired. They're gone. So instead of beating the drum, I'll see you in court if you don't give us enough money to pay for this weekend, all of that positioning and jockeying for advantage or trying to get 1%, trying to put fear into the process, people became cooperative. How do we mutually find the cleanest, least expensive, and most beneficial way to the end of this unhappy path for both of the parties and their children? And so how did he make people be peacemakers? The lawyers get fired if you go to court.
That's pretty radical. Yeah. Well, and then you talk about the neutral parties, right? Because so often if there are kids involved, there may need to be parenting experts, there may need to be financial experts, especially if you have different kinds of assets that are more difficult to value. You've talked about like mental health experts, but let me ask you this. What was confusing to me in reading about that, like you said, there are 4, and then we'll talk about litigation. But if someone says, I just want a regular divorce, I don't want to do it myself, I don't want a mediator, I don't want litigation, but I don't necessarily need, all the extra advisors in collaborative divorce. Isn't there a 5th divorce that's like you just hire a lawyer that takes you through the process, or how does that work?
Well, you can do that. There's a form of divorce, and I mentioned it briefly in the collaborative law chapter, which is called cooperative divorce. And in cooperative divorce, you just find a lawyer who doesn't sign I have to quit the case if I go to court, and your partner does the same, and you have a friendly discussion. Some of the collaborative lawyers don't like that. They consider that a Franken process because the lawyers can subtly or implicitly threaten one another. You're not being generous enough here, or you're running a really risky path here. And so there's no consequence to the lawyer by getting into threatening. Part of the problem with clients working with lawyers is lawyers make less money when they quickly get to peacemaking. And there's an inherent conflict of interest that every client has with every lawyer as they're going through. The lawyers can honestly say, you need to have more information. I need to do due diligence. And no lawyer will ever be criticized for that. But if you don't really need to do that extra work, the lawyer is lining their own pockets at the client's expense. Similarly, if you can take a more peaceful road and people don't get riled up and angry at one another, something that might take 10 hours only takes 2 hours if people are peacefully communicating. And so the conundrum is, how do you encourage lawyers to constantly be peacemakers, to constantly not do over due diligence? The only way that I know to do this is for individual participants, the people going through this process, to be well informed and to kindly, but with assertion, say, no, I don't need the last 7 years of documents looked at. I don't need this extra work. I don't need these extra people. What I need is precisely this. You can ask for precisely what you want when you're well informed. And so part of what I'm trying to do in Own Your Own Divorce is to show people where it's wise for them to insist on the case being narrower, but also where it's wise for them to sit back and allow the case to take a broader form because that's the right place for the case to go.
Right. Okay, talk about litigation as the fourth choice. And then I want to end by asking your advice on how to pick the right lawyer.
Sure. Litigation, my first 20 years in this business were in litigation. And so I have seen litigation backwards and forwards. I've seen, when I sat as a volunteer judge on the bench, I've seen some unbelievable toxicity. There are some cases, there are some people who are not able, they don't have the emotional bandwidth to go through and try to make a bargain with the spouse for whom they no longer harbor kind or warm feelings. They need the extra protection and the safety that comes from being in a formal system, such as in court. If there's been any history of spousal abuse, neglect, anger, acting out, so forth and so on, you may need to go in front of a judge who will look right at spouse and say, if there's any more activity like this, there are going to be consequences and penalties to pay, and you may even be imprisoned. Now, that's an extreme case, but there are cases like that that do arise. I sincerely hope that that's not the case of any of your listeners, but that more describes a listener's circumstance than the kind and peaceful fashion.
You know better than anybody with the 4,000 something cases. How frequently would you, and I realize collaborative divorce emerged 35 years ago. So let's just say in the last handful of years, how common are these cases that really do require litigation? Has that increased or decreased?
Ooh, that's a tough question. And I say it's tough because I've been on the friendly side of the ledger for decades now, and I've got a couple.
So you're not probably seeing as many of them.
I've got some really good litigators on speed dial. I would estimate, however, that at least 20% of cases that first present themselves, so 20 people out of 100, need the safety and security of having the potential for a judge being in a case. And so the stricter protections that are available. Now, it's a well-known fact to litigators that at least 90% of all litigation cases themselves settle frequently at the courthouse steps. One of the last things that I still do a lot of is volunteer settlement conference, judicial officer work, and we sit volunteer panels and we listen to cases that are going to go to trial in the next 30 days if they don't settle that day. And many of those cases settle that day in front of the volunteer judge, judicial volunteer panels, because they actually don't want to go to court. Other cases settle on the courthouse steps, and a handful actually go to court. Some cases need litigation. Most don't.
Okay, so those are the 4.5, with the half or the additional one being cooperative divorce. You got two divorce lawyers. Maybe you're trying to go through without it turning into litigation and so forth. How do people choose? How do you recommend people go about to choose a great lawyer or mediator for that matter?
Well, it's funny. I have a whole chapter of about the information that's available to the public. And a lot of the information available to the public isn't very good. So you can go to social media, you can go to Avo reviews, you can go to Yelp reviews. You'll see the 5 stars. Some of those are actually very, very good reviews. Although many of the reviews that are given out there that way are laudatory reviews by people who have no basis for knowing what to compare their prior lawyers' services against. So they may have actually gotten poor service, but they have no way of knowing. There are some organizations, there are some publicly available information sources. So the Martindale Hubble, the Best Lawyers, the Super Lawyer Systems have good objective systems for helping to find lawyers. There's a group of lawyers called the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers. They're excellent, but they're usually expensive, so they're not suitable for everybody who's out there. But eventually people are going to find sources for potential lawyers, and then they go out and then they actually are going to have interviews. When you interview a lawyer, these are the things that I want people to look for. And it's not at all the list that you would expect. The first thing is strategic intelligence. How bright is the attorney? And I mean that in terms of interacting and going back and forth with you. Are they capable of listening to you, or do you feel like you're talking to a professor or your grandfather or something? They better have enough strategic intelligence that you can effectively communicate with them. Emotional intelligence, that's a biggie for me. If you've ever read Daniel Goleman's book, one of the big things in emotional intelligence is people with high emotional intelligence, when chaos arises, they calm down. They get cooler. They don't get easily triggered. If you interview a lawyer who gets easily triggered, oh dear, that's not good, because that person is going to get triggered when you have difficulty. They're going to get triggered when your spouse has difficulty. Your case is going to be more dramatic. It's going to be more expensive. So that's a big one. the concept that I call the invisible estate, which is this unique collection of invisible values that have no value to anybody in the world other than you, your children, your family, and your partner. These are this is your relational capital, your in-laws, your community, the things that you really deeply care about. If they don't resonate with certain things that have value for you, if that doesn't also have value for them and they won't protect it, don't work with that. Because when you die, if there's any hereafter, if there's any consciousness, you're not bringing your property with you. You are only bringing those things that are invisible that you value with you. Why throw that stuff under the bus? One of my biggest complaints about the divorce industrial complex is so few lawyers even know that the invisible estate means so much for their clients. Sensitivity to costs. Are they a good guide for you? Do you respect this person? Are they taking you to the path of your best self, or are they guiding you in the path to your worst self? I literally have seen lawyers who suggest to their clients, you might want to forget you had that discussion. I would never hire a lawyer who asked me to do that.
Yeah, just a lack of integrity. Well, you talk about how important it is even before going down the road of looking for a lawyer to really understand what process you're angling for. And you've laid out the pros and cons. And I suspect there are some that do it all. But the truth is, it's tough for me to say, but you may want that shark lawyer if you need to go through litigation, even if they are kind of an a-hole, right? I mean, might that be an advantage if this is the guy or the woman that has a high win case? I mean, that doesn't go with mine and your ethos. But if somebody did you wrong and they are going to try to take advantage of you, and you need to lawyer up.
If my wife were to come in today and say, Larry, today's expiration day, and I've hired the biggest shark in San Francisco, and I know who they all are, and so would I go out and hire the second biggest shark in San Francisco? And the answer is absolutely not. The person I would hire would be the person whom I believed was the most effective lawyer for the needs that I had. And the best and most effective way to deal with the shark on the other side is not to have another shark, because all you're going to do is bite at one another, and what's going to get consumed is your estate. I would find somebody who knows how to deflect the energy of a person who operates like a shark and is very, very effective with the judge who's been assigned to your matter. And that might take some time to figure out who that person is. But no, I don't want the toughest lawyer in town. I want the most effective lawyer for the issue and the circumstances I'm facing, which includes the shark on the other side if the other side hired a shark.
Yeah, and I think just to go back to your other list of recommendations, I mean, the idea of fit, and a lot of what you were describing to me goes with fit and chemistry, right? If you've interviewed 3 or 4 lawyers, and it just strikes me that person that checks all those boxes that you vibe with is also important. Would you agree with that?
That's true. That's true. If I had to pick one thing that really was important to me personally, is I would want that person who continues to guide me to be the best version of myself.
Well, that integrity, 100%. I mean, that's the coming full circle, and we're going to have to wrap up now. I mean, to me, that ends up being this beautiful choice that each of us is empowered to make, right? Even when it's hard, even when the other person isn't necessarily following suit. And I love what you started with, that a lot of people, they might want to lead, they might want to take the high road, But given these extremely, and let's face it, for a lot of people, divorce is an extremely painful, harrowing experience. Some not so much. It's like, oh, thank God you feel that way too. Sayonara, right? So surely that happens. But I would expect for a lot of people, and let me actually ask you this. Last quick question. How, in your experience, how typical is it that the desire for divorce is mutual?
There's always an asymmetry. Someone has gone further down the thought process than the other. And sometimes the person who's gone further down the thought process than the other is the one who actually is willing to consider a reconciliation, because by definition, that person is the most opposed to reconciliation when professionals meet with them. And sometimes that's because the care and attention they had hoped to receive from their partner hasn't been forthcoming. I'm a big advocate of sending people early and often into a therapist's office before they make a decision to work with a lawyer for two purposes. One is to get greater clarity as to whether they are coming or going. And a lot of people are waffling. And I know a lot about therapy and psychology, but I'm not a licensed therapist. I want somebody who's truly trained to help people with that. That's really a sacred decision that you're making. Am I coming or going? So I want people to have more clarity. And this is not therapy per se. This is clarity. Some people also need a little bit of support to get the energy to stop from being stuck, because you've put so much energy, you've put so much love into a relationship. It's heartbreaking if it doesn't work out exactly the way that you wanted. And there's a tremendous amount of pain that people feel, and they feel the pain because they also felt love. And, the opposite of love is not anger or hatred. The opposite of love is indifference. And so if you're feeling pain, usually it means that affection and love still exist. And this is why it's so difficult. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to lead with kindness in a divorce, to follow through with kindness and to end with kindness, because there are hundreds, there may be thousands of people I've worked with who, when they meet one another on the street 5-10 years later, they do so with great friendship and affection. And something that was always important to them in their relationship does not get lost.
Well, and especially if you have kids. I mean, because there are a lot of people that are willing to use their kids as pawns. They're willing to be terrible to each other and say terrible things about each other. And it feels like it's worth emphasizing that if kids are in the picture, it's a whole different game. And that the need for kindness, the need for graciousness is that much greater, because if you have kids, you're always going to be connected. We're not talking 5 or 10 years. Okay, Larry, I have to let you go. But guys, Own Your Own Divorce, look at that beautiful book. If you're not watching and listening, it's a beautiful cover. You can find it on Amazon. And you've got an audiobook, you've got a Kindle, you got a hard copy. Larry, congratulations on your wonderful book. Thank you so much for being on Getting Open.
Thanks you for having me today. And I hope that your viewers will benefit from our discussion.
Oh, they certainly will. And I certainly have. Having read this, I learned a lot. Okay, guys, I hope this show was helpful to you. These are tough topics, I'm not going to lie. And honestly, as you heard me enthusiastically chime in throughout this show, because there is an alternative to the knockdown, drag out, mutually assured self-destruction that is so commonly associated with divorce. This is a beautiful book. If you're contemplating divorce, if you're in a divorce, to really be your best self, to lead with kindness and compassion. Honestly, it's such a deeply personal and powerful choice. So Wherever you are in your relationships, I wish you the best. If you are going through a divorce or contemplating it, I send extra love and kindness out to you because I know it can be a tough and very common experience for so many of us. With that, if you haven't followed Getting Open yet, please do so. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, YouTube. I don't want you to miss an episode. My team and I bring this show to you with our full hearts. And as always, write to me at gettingopen@yourtango.com and or leave a comment, rate the show. All of it matters. Mwah. Love you. Thank you. See you in the next episode.